Good afternoon, PSA UKI members. Welcome at last to PSA Webshow number 6, being booked for big business or by big business. We have Simon Hailsden as our Meet the Pros special guest today, and my co-host as ever, Alan Stevens. We are very glad for your patience with the little delay today with a few technical difficulties, so we won't delay you any further. We'll kick off. So take it away, Alan.
Thank you very much, Claire. And Claire says, welcome to PSA Web Show 6. We've had a slight hiatus between web shows, but we're back on the rails now. And delighted that Simon Hazeldean is going to be talking to us about how to get booked by big businesses and brands. So let's crack on. Simon, welcome to the web show.
Thank you, Alan.
Now, how do you particularly target bigger businesses?
Okay, so I think firstly, let me just say why I target bigger businesses, and then how I do it. Why I do it is for level of budget that they've got available, number of employees that they have, so therefore the opportunities are there. How I target. I use fairly classic things such as networking to get inside large businesses. So many industries are quite incestuous, for example, the IT industry, and people will often move from one large corporate to another. And when they do, that can obviously be a route in. Secondly, I actively solicit referrals from existing clients, so lots of HR directors know a lot of other HR directors, so get them to introduce me. We get quite a lot of work through recommendations as well, which is very nice, so word of mouth. And then I also use coaching. I use coaching in a different way. I don't do a lot of coaching because I don't think the revenue is as attractive, but I do use coaching as a very good way to build relationships with senior people inside large corporates.
And you've got I understand that you've got a very high rebooking rate, so customers come back time and time again, and that's something that we all want to try and achieve. So what's the secret of getting rebooked?
So the rebooking percentage, I run at about 85 to 90% rebooking rate each year, and I need to be clear with people that that's not necessarily keynote speaking being rebooked. Often the case is that if you've been booked to deliver a keynote speech at one annual sales conference, that they're more than likely to at least rest you for a year before they bring you back for a second one. But in terms of running seminars and workshops, what I think people need in order to get that sort of repeat booking is, firstly, you need an evergreen topic. An evergreen topic for me is something that is linked to an ongoing business challenge that large corporates will have. So I work in the sales and negotiation space largely, but also do some work in the area of leadership. So there are problems in there that customers have finding new business, keeping business, maintaining profit margins, dealing with organizational change, etc. So what I don't do is have a sort of a fad topic that is very popular for a while and then goes away. So it's having something evergreen. I like the commercial work, sales and negotiation, because it's able to provide a hard return on investment argument for a client. And then I think also you need to be sufficiently penetrated inside the client's organization to get yourself repeat booked. And obviously it goes without saying you have to do an absolutely fantastic delivery job.
So for being good at what you do is pretty much a precursor to all that, Simon.
100%. Yeah, they're only gonna rebook you. But if you can show that what you've done has delivered an ROI for them, that makes their internal case for the budget much easier for them to do. And I think probably the best example for me is I do a lot of negotiation seminars, negotiation training, and for one of my largest clients, I think in the last 4 years they've booked 66 of them, I think. So we're sort of running at a quite a significant run rate business. So that gives you a revenue pipeline that's very attractive to have.
So Simon, do you set yourself up for rebooking? So do you plant the seed in the customer's mind, in the client's mind, before you do the speaking gig?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happens upstream rather than so the delivery is downstream. What happens upstream is a lot of careful sales work to find out where the client's having problems, what are their challenges, what are their issues, and then digging a bit deeper to find out what's the impact and the cost of those problems and challenges. So, for example, they're under margin pressure from their customers, so that is affecting their profitability, and then talk about or trying to position what you do as something that should be rolled out across the employees or the target group of employees. So for some of my clients, a number of my programs are mandatory for their salespeople. So that's a really, really good place to get to, so that every single salesperson in the organization at some stage will need to attend.
Excellent. And we've had a question come in from an audience member who says they can't make it live as they're on their way to a meeting, but that doesn't matter. We don't mind. Off you go. We're not as important as your meeting, but hey, maybe it's a big bit of business. But anyway, the question, Simon, is: do you actively sell to big corporates, or do you rely on your marketing and reputation to draw them to you? And if you do make sales approaches, who's the best target person in terms of the job title you approach?
Well, certainly it is good to have visibility in the marketplace, and so I do put a lot of focus on that. So, finding there are a number of ways to do this. So, understand first of all who your target market is, and then secondly, you can then work out, once you know who your target market is, where do they go? For example, what conferences do they attend? What publications do they read? What blogs do they look at? What associations are they part of? So a key target for me, for example, is the Institute of Sales and Marketing Management. So I'll make sure that I get featured in there. So yes, that helps. For me personally, what works for me is sales. It's definitely a sales approach. So it's getting inside the client. And for example, Neil Rackham, the guy who wrote In Selling, so I was with Neil at the Sales Performance Association earlier this week. He's still doing his fantastic stuff. He talks about finding the point of receptivity in a client. So that's someone who'll meet you. They won't necessarily be the person who's got the problem or the budget, but they get you in, and then you use that person to introduce you to someone who has a problem or a challenge, so they're feeling the pain, and or the more senior person. So it is a selling job to get yourself in, find the person with the problem, help them to understand the scale of that problem and what the cost is, and then position yourself as providing the solution to their problem. So for me, large corporates is a big selling job rather than necessarily a marketing job.
Okay, and so that's how you get your foot in the door with those sorts of organisations, Simon. But people who try this sometimes don't get it right. And you must have seen this happen many times. What's the biggest mistake people make when they're trying to sell to big business, to big corporations?
Well, certainly to big business, and I would just say a general biggest problem or mistake people have with sales, full stop, is what I call premature pitching. So to illustrate, if you went to see your doctor because you were feeling a little bit under the weather, and the doctor said to you, can I help you? You say, yeah, I'm not feeling very well. And the doctor said, not a problem, Simon. Take 3 of these tablets 3 times a day. You'll be fine in a week. You'd run a mile because you'd want a second opinion because there's been no diagnosis. So you can't pitch or make a proposal to a client until you've diagnosed firstly what problems they've got, and secondly what solution they would like to have. So what is the problem? What is the impact and cost of that problem? And then what result do they want to get? And what is the impact and the benefit of that result? When and only when you have done that are you in a position to pitch or sell to the client.
And forgive me if I think my taxi was arriving there for a moment. I don't know what that was. Forgive me for saying so, Simon, but you've been doing this for a wee while now.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Not the first year that you're in business, so you will have seen some changes. And so, how has the world of selling changed, and what does that mean for us as speakers?
Okay, so what used to be what we might call transactional selling, and it was largely originated by a book that was published in 1925 called The Psychology of Selling, by E.K. Strong, and it was basically around selling life insurance. And there was a bit of shallow needs finding fairly shallow level, then the salesperson went into a very carefully rehearsed, scripted, planned and prepared pitch. So they were pitching at the customer, and then there was a lot of work on overcoming objections, techniques, and going for the close and closing the sale. Where we are now is the world shifted. Firstly, the internet has arrived, and the customer are far more educated, far more able to research you in advance and compare and contrast. So you have a much more educated and informed buyer. They're much more resistant to canned, scripted, slick pitches. And so the model really is to turn it on its head, is to hugely expand the amount of needs finding you do with the clients, do a really good job of finding out what they need, what they want, where they're hurting, what the impact is, then making a customized, tailored presentation that is only about their needs and about them, and starts with them and finishes with them. And then the overcoming objections piece is usually, you know, I wouldn't even call them objections. I prefer to call them concerns or questions. And then the close really is not this orgasmic peak that it used to be that you rise to at the end of the sale. It's just a, so are we going to go ahead then? Do you want to give me a purchase order? So we need I think to be mindful that the modern buyer is better informed, better educated, more cynical of sales and marketing than ever before, and also short of time.
So you've described the process very well there, Simon, so I can see how that's changed. But we're talking about big business and big corporations. Is the process more complex when you're selling to a large organization as opposed to when you're selling to an individual or a small company?
It certainly has to be more considered, Alan. The fundamental tenets of it, I think, are very similar. The one thing that you will encounter in large corporates is a greater number of decision makers who are involved in making the decision. So what's sometimes referred to as the decision-making unit. So in an organization of about 200 employees, research shows there's about 3.4 people involved in the decision. In 1,000 plus, so large corporate, and you know, even larger, small, medium businesses, it's about 6.5 people involved in making the decision. Interestingly, the average salesperson sees about 1.6 of those 6.5 people. I think the 0.5 is probably 0.65 is a very small person in procurement or something.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I think I've met them. Yeah,
very short but dangerous procurement person.
Nasty piece of work. Yeah.
So you have to identify and what we refer to as working the grid. So what are the stages of the client's decision-making process? What process are they going to go through? What decision is made at each step? So, you know, 3 possible suppliers, so the decision is what are the 2 possible down to 1 final supplier. What criteria will be used for the decision, who is involved in the decision, and what timing, what date is that going to take place on. And then you obviously need to make sure you pick off and influence and sell to all of the key people in the decision-making unit. So
yeah. Thanks, Simon. So how can a speaker, as a specific type of supplier, how can speakers sell themselves most effectively to a large organisation?
Well, I think what some of the speakers probably, I say get wrong, and I don't mean that to sound disrespectful, because we're all very enthusiastic about what we do and often very passionate about our topic and about our subject. And I think sometimes we talk a little bit too much about us and what we do, and not on what the client wants to get from the conference or wants from the event. So I will always say, you know, what do you want the people in the audience to do or think or say as a result of the session? And how does the conference fit into your overall strategy? What is it you are wanting to achieve? So therefore my session would support and drive their objectives from the conference. So obviously that sometimes can take a little bit longer as a speaker, but also what I try to do is always get access to some of the senior people to gather their views under the guise, if you like, to making sure I can do a really good speech for them. But that also opens up a contact point for me within the organisation for future follow-up. So certainly, go on, Claire.
Go.
Related to that, Simon. You were talking earlier about, really understanding the problems of the organization and what solutions they need, and that's, a fundamental part of the sales process. But when I'm talking to people that are starting to approach big businesses, they're having challenges even having those conversations. You're saying about targeting the key people so that they can tell you what do they want to achieve. What do the audience respond? What do they want as a result of you delivering whatever you're going to deliver? But quite often it's hard for that conversation to start. So do you have any tips on how do you get businesses to share with you what their real problems are so that you can start talking to them about how you can help them with the solutions to those?
Yeah, quite often. There is a little bit of resistance, particularly if they don't know you, because obviously, it's about their comfort level with you. So the first thing to do is to try to establish higher levels of psychological comfort as possible with somebody by, being non-threatening and open and that sort of stuff that affects their midbrain, the emotional part of the brain. So because when somebody meets a stranger for the first time, the brain tends to go into the more primitive parts of the brain tend to go in a minor form of threat response, which is that slightly uncomfortable feeling you get when you meet somebody. So it's really good to use open body language, shake hands firmly, but not too strongly or weakly. To be led by their behaviour. They're a get straight down to business person, get straight down to business. If they do want to chat a little bit. And that's the basic rapport building work that people do. Then they will often sometimes want to, say, okay, what can you do to help us? And I then move off that. If they do that, I move off that, and I would say something like, hey, look, I could probably talk about what we could do for 2 hours, no problem at all. But until I know what's most important to you, it's really difficult for me to know what is the most appropriate solution for you. So it would be really good if you could maybe tell me a little bit about the business, and then I start to funnel down in the conversation, and slowly, carefully, just they become more and more explicit about what they're saying and their problems and their challenges. So you can start at quite my recommendation is the best sort of business conversational opener would be to say, I was looking at your website before I came to see you, and I noticed it refers to X. Is that something that is important, or could you tell me a little bit about that? And then they start talking. Then they'll start talking and opening up. So start general and then dig down into the more specific problems.
That's a good tip. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Claire. And sometimes you're going to get called into a big corporation. I mean, I've certainly been in this situation. I'm sure you have too, where it's a big sales pitch.
Yeah.
Somebody has said, there's a big contract. We want a big pitch. There's going to be a whole load of directors there. But how do you approach that? How do you handle that?
Well, firstly, if at all possible, try to identify who those decision makers are and have some sort of contact with them in advance of the pitch. So what you can do is find, sometimes you can develop a relationship with somebody who is very pro you inside the client's organization. And they'll coach you a little bit on how to win the business. So those are relationships that are very good to nurture. Then I would say structure of your pitch is absolutely important. So quite often what people will do is they will start by talking about their company and what they can do to help. So my tongue-in-cheek commentary when I'm speaking about this at the PSA regions is, how to lose business by being self-obsessed. So you start off, slide 1 is, hey, look, we're great. Slide 2 is, we're even more great than that. Slide 3 is, here's the map of the world showing all the places we've got operations or wherever we've worked. And it's all about me, rather than customer. So my recommended structure would be to start with a background and context positioning. Here's what we understand about your business. Second part of it is, here's what we understand about what you need, what you're looking for, and then here's what we understand about your objective. So here's you, here's your challenges, here's your objectives. Then I come in and say, here's how we can help. Then I provide some testimonials and case studies. Then I talk about what the cost will be, maybe calling it an investment rather than a cost, and then close on actions. So close on what is the next action. So there's only 3 outcomes of a sales pitch. Or there's 3 outcomes of a sales visit, actually, in terms of a client. There's only really 3. You close the business, you move the business forward to the next stage in the sales process, or you find a new piece of business. So you want some action. So what do you want the client to do or say or believe at the end of your sales pitch is a very clear action step at the end.
Excellent, great advice, Simon. And I know you speak a lot to PSA regions, and obviously we're very grateful that you're able to come on the web show and talk to us and share your advice and your wisdom. And when you've talked to PSA regions, I know that you've talked about the 4 different types of buyers that you find in a large corporate. So do you think you could briefly just describe how you see those 4 different types of buyer?
Yeah, absolutely, because this forms part of that decision-making process or that decision-making unit, that different people you sell to in a large corporate will have different needs, and they are interested in different things. And so therefore you need to tailor your sales approach to meet those. So the first one is the executive or the senior level buyer, MD, CEO, CFO, senior managers, usually interested in more strategic matters and thinking at a company enterprise level, generally very bright, very clever, very short attention spans. You've just got to give them the main points of the news, a little bit like an executive summary in a report. Then you've got technical buyers. So these are people who are going to assess what you have to offer from a technical perspective. And for most speakers or trainers or consultants, that's often the domain of human resources. So they, for example, are going to be interested in how you apply Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of learning evaluation, for example. They are going to be interested in the statistical validity of your psychometric, those sort of things. That's the sort of information that's going to make the executive buyer just go to sleep. Then you've got the operational end users. So for me, these are often the sales directors, the sales managers. They are only interested really in operational stuff. So a sales director is interested in, does this guy help my salespeople to sell more, make more money, etc. And then you have probably the one that people will probably find the most challenging, the procurement or the financial buyer. So in large corporates, if you go above a certain spend level, you will often encounter the procurement department whose job it is to make sure they're getting the very best value for money. So there, people will say, oh, they're interested in price. That's not true. I train procurement people to negotiate. They're interested in finding the best supplier and getting the best possible value for money. The reason people think they talk about price is too many people allow themselves to be boxed into the price corner. Talking about is your price, then you are in trouble.
Can I just ask you a little bit more? Just ask you to perhaps say a little bit more about the very senior level.
Yeah.
The CEO, the MD, people who are going to be, as you say, very short of time, maybe a short attention span because they've got loads of things to cope with. What are the things that really push their buttons?
I have a lot of success using a framework that I got from a good friend of mine, Phil Jessen, who's a real expert on key account management. Many people listening will know Phil. And it's a simple 1-page diagram called strategic bridges. And on the left-hand side, there's where the business is now. On the opposite side, the right-hand side, there's a sort of a summary of where they would like to be in 3 years' time, for example. And then there are the bridges, the arrows going across horizontally, which are the strategic initiatives that the client has in place. Strategic initiatives will then usually have projects underpinning those. Yeah. And if you can then show how you support them in moving from where they are to where they want to be, you start to position yourself as a strategic partner and a strategic enabler, and not just a transactional supplier. And that works for large corporates. I would also say that model works really well for any business. Where are you now? Where do you want to get to? How are you planning on getting there? Here's how we can help you.
And so that I can see how that can work. So it's a great model. So that could even work with individuals. I mean,
100%, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. So. And obviously, you want to get the business. You want to get the business from corporates. You want to get the business from any size organisation. How do you go about maximising the revenue that you can get from that business? What are the tips there?
Okay, there's a few ways that I use to maximize revenue. Firstly, is to sell multi-level solutions into the client. So rather than just, for example, providing sales training, we would also then say, well, in order to make the sales training most effective, we need to make sure that your sales management are equipped with the skills to coach and develop their people. So go up a level, and then a level above that, you might say, well, let's make sure your sales leadership is in a good place. And then there's also consultancy revenue from sort of helping them to sort out their strategy and their approach. And then there's training revenue. So ideally, do the two. Help them to diagnose the problem and the solution, and then be part of the delivery. The second method I use is to provide foundation level training and advanced training. So foundation negotiation training, advanced negotiation training, which is for less people but is more expensive. And then clients will also increasingly pay for implementation support. So provide some sort of seminar, workshop, speech, but then provide some sort of embedding vehicle, such as using virtual WebEx or coaching support. That's how I use coaching a lot. I was doing 2 coaching calls this morning. They are 10 managers who are on a program. So we did face-to-face for 3 days. We then have them in 6 weeks after the program, and then 12 weeks after the program on a WebEx, 2-hour WebEx, where we share best practice and how they've been doing. And they also get individual one-to-one telephone-based coaching. That usually can at least double, the add-on embedding can at least double your revenue from the original seminar or workshop.
We've got a couple of questions have come in here, Simon, if I can just check these out.
Yeah, sure.
Incidentally, thank you very much for sending questions in. Those of you who are watching, keep the questions coming in. We've got Simon here for a while. We're happy to grill him for as long as possible. So this one's quite an interesting one. They're saying that you may be in a pitch up against some other suppliers. So there might be 2 or 3 of you in a process where we're all trying to get the business. What kind of advice would you give to people who find themselves in that kind of competitive situation where they're up against people who they may not know?
Yeah. So firstly, I mean, there's 2 schools of thought, Alan, on competitors. I think one is to do lots of homework on your competitors and really try to find their Achilles heel, for example. And the other one is to spend more time focusing on the customer than on the competition. I favour the latter approach. I think Jeff Bezos from Amazon says we are obsessed with our customers. We keep an eye on our competitors. That's not to say you ignore your competitors, but focus on your unique points. And certainly what works for me is focusing on the results the client wants to get and not talking about the speech and the workshop so much. A lot of my competitors, they'll say our people are great, our training great, I'm a great speaker, I've written loads of books and all that sort of stuff. The client's not really interested in that. The client's interested in the results. So I've found that to be a very, very successful strategy. Yes, if you can find out who your competitors are, then sometimes that can happen. I have one particular competitor who I know have a proprietary trademarked licensed approach that they like to bring into clients. So if we know we're up against them, we would go down the route of we customize, tailor it. We don't force our proprietary knowledge on you. Right. So we work with you to create a custom solution. Or we'll say something like, we do not have an off-the-shelf solution. We don't do off-the-shelf. We have very strong ideas and principles around what we think good selling and negotiation is, but we would like to work with you, customize and adapt those to meet your organizational challenges.
So a bit of a judo solution there, Simon. So you're taking your opponent's weight and using it against them to drop them on the camera.
100%. And it's been very successful in taking out some very, very big name people a number of times.
So you can fight well above your weight. That's fantastic. And another question that quite a few people are interested in is the international dimension here. I mean, you're talking about big business. They're liable to be multinational. They can have branches in the company. How do you approach getting international work out of big business?
Well, I went on a management consultancy training program many years ago, and I remember it was a very good program. And the guy running it said, in consultancy, the principle is let the client take you into the country. So don't attempt to set up a beachhead in, Saudi or Germany or wherever, because it's a very expensive way to do it. Work with the clients and then get the client to take you into that country. That's a great thing about large corporates, is they usually work across lots of different countries. And so it's about identifying where the main point of influence is, which is usually the headquarters, and then starting to move out from country to country. So in my largest client at the moment, we are now rolling out in 13 countries in 12 languages. So we've picking off one country after another, and then as one zone of an organization. So the EMEA zone starts doing something and making a noise. Sometimes the other zones, like Asia Pacific or North America, will be interested to have a conversation about it, or you proactively say, who is your opposite number in your North America zone? Right. Could you connect me to them? And if you've done a good job in Western Europe or in EMEA, why would they not be happy to connect you across?
And would you ever go to, sorry, Simon, I mean, would you ever say to somebody, for example, I noticed that you've got branches in Germany or France, I happen to be there for another client, would you like me to go in and talk to your people? Would you?
Perfect. Anything that gives you some sort of a reason behind a request is very, 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 very powerful. So yeah, absolutely. I'm over in Germany. Could I go and see your colleague in Bremen? Would that be okay? Yeah, sure. Let me get in touch. And if you don't ask, you don't get.
How true.
I love bratwurst. Can you give me an excuse to stay a few days longer and eat more?
Yeah, it's just ask. It's just asking. And people are very happy to refer. We all refer. Tradesmen, for example, our electrician is fantastic. I'd be happy to recommend our electrician or our plumber to anybody. 100%. They're absolutely fantastic. I would actively want my friends and family or contacts to know of these people because they do a great job. So if you have done a good job for them, why on earth would they have any problem with referring you to their colleagues? And then they and other than the odd bit of political stuff, there is absolutely no reason.
And when we talked before, Simon, we've talked a bit about coaching. I know you get involved in coaching occasionally, and you said that you don't do standalone one-to-one coaching as a kind of revenue generator, but you use coaching in a very specific way. So
yeah, I don't specifically target one-to-one coaching as a revenue generator because in large corporates, because they often buy quite a lot of executive coaching, there'll be some sort of price threshold that they have. It can still, don't get me wrong, it can still be very lucrative, but if you do a 2-hour coaching session and if you can't schedule another one that day, that can restrict your revenue that you would earn from the day versus, say, a speech or a workshop or a seminar. But it is a very, very effective way to build very deep relationships with key people. So I do use it as an entry strategy into a client. So if you do some coaching for the MD, one client, I did some coaching with the sales director who wanted to become the MD. That was the purpose of the coaching. And so we did 6 sessions together, and lo and behold, he becomes the MD. Well, then that's rock and roll, Then we now have a conversation about what changes he wants to make. So the other thing that I do quite a lot of is training managers to coach or leaders to coach their people effectively. And so with one client last year, I had the entire senior team for 2 days for a coaching seminar. Well, that is a sales opportunity goldmine. So that one, do a good job, add some value. You're privy to lots of conversations about what's going on in their business, and then after 2 days you built a relationship and just do follow-up visits and go and see them. So that works fantastically well for me.
Excellent. So we've got a question coming from Jackie Barry, saying, is there any particular jargon that you need to know when you're talking to big business, and any Any words that kind of trigger a good response?
Jargon. Each industry has its own jargon. So, for example, if if you're working in the IT area, I suppose it wouldn't do you any harm to at least be cognizant of some of the main themes of that industry. Cloud, analytics, big data, that sort of thing. You most definitely don't have to be an expert in the industry, because you can position yourself as providing external perspective. And then if you listen carefully to the words that the managers that you're speaking to are using, you'll start to get a sense of that. And also have a look at the website, and quite a lot of them will have their values written up there, their mission statement, their vision statement, and that gives you some idea. I was with a client on Monday who have a very, very strong ethical approach to doing business. So it's clearly all over the website is their ethics statement and how they like to work. So therefore, when I'm having a conversation with them about key account management work, it obviously I manage or what I do is I emphasize the ethical approach to building relationships and winning business with your customers. So start to feed some of their language back into your language. So I just keep your eyes and ears open, rather than, do you need to be able to talk about, blue ocean strategy or something? No, I don't think you do.
Unless you're working with Jacques Cousteau, obviously, in which case.
Yes.
Another question's coming from. Unfortunately, can't tell you who it is. It just says audience question has come in. It says, how do you get big business to take you seriously if you've never worked in one or with one before?
Okay, well, firstly, you have to take yourself seriously. What I call don't give up in the car park. So you manage to get your meeting with the head of whatever, GlaxoSmithKline or Coca-Cola or Microsoft or somebody. What you mustn't do is lose your nerve when you pull into the car park, because all businesses have problems and challenges and things they need help with. And often the bigger the business, the bigger the problems. So they'd be very interested in what you can do to help. Yes, having a track record and being able to quote other clients is absolutely vitally important for you, but you can only start where you are. So do a really good job of understanding what they're looking for and get your first gig in there, and then you've got that client logo or that client testimonial for your website. And I don't think you have to have a track record in large corporates to work in large corporates. I don't do a lot of work, for example, in the public sector, because I'm a sort of a corporate guy by background, but I have done quite a lot of work with the police, for example. I don't have any background in law enforcement.
To the police, Simon, apparently.
Sorry?
You're well known to the police.
Yeah. Yes, I help them with their inquiries quite often. But when they actually are very interested in a commercial perspective on leadership, for example. So, you can only always say to speakers who are newer, you start where you are with what you've got. That's where everybody starts off. And what I would say definitely is, if you can write a book, that is a very, very good credibility driver with any customer. I would definitely recommend.
Any books that you've written hanging around, Simon?
I would. The ones over there. They, as we were saying earlier, I see yours in the background on the shelf as well.
Yes.
So that would be a bit of blatant self-promotion.
I haven't written my book.
It would be a bit of subtle selling, I believe. A little bit of soft selling. Claire, you had a follow-up question, I think.
Yeah, so Simon, on that, I think, the PSA is all about helping people speak more and speak better, and we're doing the speak more part of it, and getting booked in big businesses is a lot of what our members want to do. But when they're starting out, it's like that last question is like, well, how do you build that credibility? Would you ever consider, or have you ever kind of done a type of a joint venture with an established speaker that's already in with a big business to kind of do some sort of work with them in-house with a bigger corporation to try and establish yourself with that credibility and do some work already with a corporate, and then kind of switch back to your own kind of branch then afterwards? So joining with another speaker, good idea, bad idea?
Yeah, definitely, if you've got a complementary, non-competing skill set, or even if you compete in inverted commas with that speaker, there's still massive opportunities to joint venture. I have a strategic partnership with an organisation that I use to resource my clients and with their consultants. So, I've got, I need a German speaking, Italian, Finnish, Norwegian, Swedish, and I'm not really interested in playing the associate game and having to coordinate. So I leverage their scale and capability, and sometimes I will go in and sell that organisation rather than myself as an individual, because that gives instant scale and credibility. So that is a 6-year long-standing joint venture that has been fantastically successful, and has really helped me. When I've only had my business, I had a proper job 6 years ago, so that built me a client CV very rapidly, if you like.
Right.
So go on, Claire. Did you follow up with that, or shall
I? Just saying, great. Yeah, good. Yeah, it's good to know that it's a useful thing, because sometimes, when we're trying to build ourselves as speakers, we're worried about giving too much away or giving to other people. But if we can do that even for the short term, joint venturing, collaborating, then it can work out better for everybody.
I mean, I'm in the sales arena. I worked and collaborated with a number of people who could be perceived as direct competitors to me within the PSA, because they speak on similar topics, and then the same in the negotiation. I certainly with the PSA, I just don't view it. I don't view it as that. I think providing you have a grown-up, honest conversation and you agree the ground rules, you can collaborate with your competition, if you like. And make use of each other's skills and capabilities. If I had a client who said I need someone who is a real kick-ass cold calling expert, direct sales, I've done that. I did that in the past. I did that a long time ago. I know 2 or 3 people in the PSA who are much better at that than I am, and therefore it would do my client the best possible service to introduce those people should, for example, that need arise.
Great.
So just following on from that, Simon, you mentioned don't do cold calling anymore. You would bring somebody in. I mean, do you approach people through LinkedIn? Is it referral, recommendation? How do you get most business leads? How does that come about?
Most of mine come through working my network and working it proactively and getting referrals from existing clients. I'm not knocking cold calling at all. It's a very, very useful way of business development, but all the research and the data shows that it is getting harder and harder to do so. And I think it's probably very difficult these days, not impossible, but very difficult to get through a very good executive PA gatekeeper and get through to a person of considerable influence. And there are people in the PSA who are much better at doing that than I am. I just go through a different route to get to those people. I just find that's the easier. My philosophy is land and expand. So just get in there and expand your contact base, and then I do that from a revenue. Just get on the books, do some revenue. Then you've got a reason to go back and start to have further conversations.
Okay, we've got another question that's coming from Neil Bakewell. Hi, Neil. What if you wanted to offer something a little off the wall, say dressing up as a well-known king of England and providing a talk about how the Tudors controlled their branding and image and how that relates to modern business? What would you do? We must say, Neil, that's what he does. But I mean, in his shoes, and they're quite big shoes, what would you do?
I would have to find clients who have an appetite for that sort of edgy kind of approach, an edgy material. That sounds to me, some of my clients will probably go, yeah, that sounds really interesting. That's a bit weird, off the wall. That could be very, because some of them are looking for something different.
Yeah.
Others, my more conservative clients, would just go, no, that's just way outside of our comfort zone. That sounds to me like a qualification process to find the client's appetite for that sort in large corporates for that sort of approach. But they often are desperately looking for something different at their conferences, because they're trying to, sometimes they're trying to move away from the same old, and it depends on the client. I think you've got to find clients with the appetite for that sort of more creative stuff.
Another question from Jackie Barry. Thanks, Jackie. It says, do you charge different rates for big corporates and small businesses, and how do you set them? We're not asking you what they are, obviously, because we haven't talked about the what's your philosophy?
I suppose what I don't, why I'm pausing is I'm just making sure I answer thoroughly. What I don't do is just assume that a smaller business has less budget than a larger business. So that's probably the first dangerous thing to do. So what I would tend to work backwards from is the scale of the client's problem and the impact of what that's costing them. So therefore, if it's a big costly problem to them, they're going to be far more likely to pay more money.
Yeah.
If you're doing large scale rollouts in corporates, they often have a benchmarking rate, a threshold rate within which they'll be comfortable. To go above that threshold rate, you would have to make a very strong return on investment case, I would say. I test pricing. You test pricing before you pitch. Don't test your price point in your pitch. Condition your price beforehand and check it. Ballpark figure. What budget have you got set aside for this issue? You haven't got any budget. Okay, so how are you gonna fund it then? And what I would say to Jackie and everyone else is, I talk about money early in the sales process. Start talking about money and payment early in the sales process. Firstly, it guards against unscrupulous people bringing in, say, 3 different consultants, having a good meeting, and then deciding to do the solution themselves. But also to qualify out, if there isn't any money available and they're not going to find the money from anywhere, I'm not going to spend my time. I'm not going to spend my time pursuing that opportunity. So be brave, have the money conversation up front.
Interesting you say that, Simon, because I've heard lots of speakers say the opposite, where they would sell the value and make sure that the client really wanted them, and then either have the conversation or have someone else have the conversation about the cost of the business. And you're saying,
well, I suppose that I'm probably more talking around the consultancy and seminars piece. As a speaker, your bureau, for example, or your agent can sometimes negotiate a better price for you than you can, because they're able to say things. Well, I really don't think Simon would work for that amount. Could you, etc. So, but before you go for your final price point, you do need to have built up the value. What I'm saying is, have the money conversation and find out what looks like a ballpark tolerance for the client, and have they got some money, then build up your value, and then talk about the investment they're going to need to give you in order for you to return a bigger investment for them.
Yeah. Jackie's just sent us a follow-up question. She's saying, do you find that large corporates pay more slowly than small businesses?
Yes, they do. We've got large corporates who pay 30 days on the button. We've got some large corporates who pay 60 days, and we have one that pays beyond that amount. And that's just a choice. Do you want the business or not? Providing you follow their process, and you part of your early conversation is, how does decisions get made? How do orders get placed? Do I need a purchase order? What do I need to have on my invoice, etc. So really make sure you follow their payment process, and usually there's no problem. They tend to pay pretty reliably. One of our 60-day clients pays 6 days, but it's on the button. And I think we've got to realise that we're not in a business. I don't hold stock. I don't need a lot of capital to finance and run my business. So for me, cash flow is not as important as it would be for, say, a more traditional business.
Yeah, fair call. We've
Mentioned
got about 10 minutes left. So, Claire, go on.
Sorry, Sam, you mentioned something there, purchase order, and it was one of the things I was thinking about one of the earlier questions, which was about jargon. And what you've just said is that, as a speaker that wants to get booked by big businesses, you need to understand the systems within the business. And I think that's key, is that if you've not worked in a big corporate and don't understand how corporates make buying decisions and how they make payments and how they process payments, it can be very hard because, for example, you might not even know what a PO is.
Yeah. I mean, I did a really very lucrative keynote for a very large pharmaceutical company in the last few months, and initially it looked like a one-off piece of work. It was one specific conference. I wasn't convinced that necessarily that there would be more work. It's impossible to tell, but I still had to register, for example, as a supplier with them and complete some paperwork and get a supplier number and those sort of things. So, really understand. I suppose the question you've got to ask, but in a more subtle manner, is what have I got to do to make sure I get paid? And just ask the customer and follow the process through and map it and just do whatever they tell. It's not usually particularly complicated. It can take a little bit of upfront time, first of all, but once you're on the books, it's usually plain sailing.
I was just saying there, Simon, we've got about 8 minutes left now.
Okay.
So any kind of last questions, a little shout out to anybody who's watching for any last questions to come in. I've got a couple more here. The question is, how do you get onto a preferred suppliers list?
Okay, preferred supplier list. Find out what the criteria are for the preferred supplier list, and then you have to meet it. It is also sometimes that will be used as a bit of a carrot and or a trap by procurement, who might say to you, in order to get onto the preferred supplier list, you are going to have to drop your price to this level. So I've certainly had that done to me by someone. I just took that as a negotiation ploy. Particularly because I knew from conversations with another contact what the price tolerance was, what they were paying some of the existing suppliers. So actually the procurement guy was telling me a lie, or was being economical with the truth. Yeah. There will sometimes be some criteria. You may have to provide your liability insurance details to them. You may have to provide some sort of legal commitment. For example, one client, and I won't mention them, but they're outside the UK. They have a clause in their preferred supplier agreement that you have to say that you are not involved with or never have been involved with Scientology, for example. So that's probably the strangest criteria. I can only assume they've had some sort of issue in the past. And for training providers, that is one of the questions that you have to satisfy them on. So that's a very unusual one, but others might be, potentially accreditation or something. But usually it's insurance, usually, public liability, etc.
And finally, I think we should give you a chance to talk about your books, Simon. You've got them beautifully positioned behind your left shoulder there. Tell us a bit about your books and how your books have helped your business.
Okay, so I've written 5 to date. I'm planning on doing another one. I had a proper job when I first started writing. So Bare Knuckle Selling was the first book. Followed that up with Bare Knuckle Negotiating. Then it was Bare Knuckle Customer Service that I co-wrote. The Inner Winner was my master's degree in psychology that I turned into a book. And my latest book is Neurosell, which is about how to use neuroscience as part of your sales process. It's a cliche. Other people have said it much better than I will. It's probably the best business card in the book. I definitely use them as a credibility driver, because I think as speakers, and also maybe as if you're running training, seminars, workshops, I do think that a big part of the buying process, you need to prove you're not going to die on your backside on stage, or you're not going to be dreadful before they'll listen to the good stuff.
Yes.
Because if you're, I spoke out in South Africa for a company, and the executive PA was the person who always shortlisted the speakers for the event, and there were 3 or 4 speakers. And when I went up on stage, the board or the managers are sitting in the front row, the senior managers, and this lady, Jean, is sitting off at one end of that row. So you can imagine what goes through her mind is, if I book this guy and he's dreadful, my boss is sitting in the front row, I'm going to get into trouble. So you need to really make that person feel comfortable. And I think having written a book, as bizarrely as it sounds, because you could write a really good book and be a really bad speaker, or the other way around, it gives them a sense of comfort. And that if you're an authority, or you're perceived to be an authority, which is Robert Cialdini's persuasion principles, if you're perceived to be an authority, you'll be more influential. So, how do we know you're any good at negotiation? Well, tell you what, why don't you let me leave you a copy of my book, have a read. If you like it, if it suits your organization, why don't we schedule another meeting? And then let them make a decision. That's also a very powerful sales approach, which is you almost withdraw from the sales process slightly. You acknowledge that the client may not wish to work with you.
Right.
So we'll sometimes say, our understanding of this meeting is for you to decide whether, for example, we should carry on talking to each other or not, whether you might like to book me for your conference or not. You're only saying what's a reality for the client anyway. But I think when you do that, it makes you come across as more confident and comfortable, and also you're not desperate for the business, which is a horrible energetic property for a salesperson or a speaker to have.
Yeah. So, I think that point is so important, Simon. I'm kind of nodding ferociously as you're saying that, because so often I hear that with new speakers, and they're trying to do the sales process, and they don't realise actually giving potential customers the no opportunity and acknowledging the fact that they can say no and that's okay is actually very powerful in helping them feel more comfortable in saying yes.
Because if I get an inbound call in the office, and they maybe say something like, we've got our annual sales conference on the 22nd of May, they usually say something like, are you available? Or that's one of the first things they'll often check. And I will then look at my diary and say, okay, that's one of several dates I'm holding for a client, and they're not going to need them all. So yeah, possibly that's the situation. And then they'll say, okay, and how much are you, or something like that. And then I'll say, well, before we carry on that conversation, could I ask some questions about your company, the conference, and what you're hoping to get? Because I really want to make sure that I'm the right speaker for you, or if I'm the right speaker, because none of us want the wrong gig, because it's going to be disastrous for our business and our reputation. But also it slightly positions you as being a little bit scarce and selective, and psychologically that will make them want you more than the other way. And get them talking first.
Brilliant.
We're nearly out of time, I'm afraid, Simon. Time has flown by. We've just got a couple of minutes, so let me offer you the opportunity in the last 60 seconds or so to just offer us your best tip with regard to getting booked by big business. What would that be?
My biggest tip will be get outside your own head and get inside the customer's head. Average salespeople have their objective and their sale and their revenue in the front of their mind, and they've got the customer's needs in the back of their mind. Exceptional salespeople have the customer's needs and wants and desires in the front of their mind. They push their own objectives to the back of their mind, and the paradoxical thing is the more you focus on what the client wants, the easier it is for you to get what you want. So get out of your own head and get inside the customer's head. I think Graham Jones, when I was with Graham, he quoted some survey he'd seen of meeting planners, that speakers are somewhere down the list of priorities for a meeting planner around 7 or 8, and that's below, is there enough coffee, tea and biscuits available at the breaks? So get your ego out of the way and focus on what's important to the client. Find out what's important to the client, and then show the client how you can help them get what they want. That's the most effective way to sell yourself as a speaker, consultant, trainer, or coach.
Simon, absolutely brilliant. I said the hour's flown by, but just before I hand back to Claire, may I thank you?
My pleasure.
Your wisdom. It's been absolutely splendid. It's been a terrific hour. And the great thing is this will now go up on YouTube and be archived, and people may now be watching this years after you deliver these words of wisdom.
I'll be deeply honoured if they do.
He looks young. So if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that, Simon?
Yeah, always happy to help out people in the PSA. www.simonhazeldine.com, SIMONHAZELDINE. It's spelt Dine, pronounced Dean, family quirk, or simon@simonhazeldine.com, or my Twitter @simonhazeldine. Always happy to answer questions and be of any help to my fellow PSAers.
Brilliant, Simon. Thank you very much. So let me say thanks again and hand back to you, Claire.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Simon. It's been brilliant. As Alan says, we'll have this as a resource now on our YouTube channel, which is brilliant. For any of our PSA members, do keep your eye out for when Simon might be coming to speak in your PSA region, because he does do that every so often. I've heard him speak myself and learned a lot from him, and again today. I think what's brilliant about you, Simon, is that you're sharing solid experience, you know, and that's the key difference. It's not just the theories, and we know that you know the theories and knowledge, but it's actually the practical application that you've had as well. So it gives new people much more security in going, well, it has worked, it does work. So if I follow this, then there's a good chance it'll work for me. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We did have a little bit of a technical challenge today. Hangouts is brilliant, but sometimes it can be a challenge. Our next PSA web show, that'll be PSA web show number 7, will be with our president, and that will be in January. So Mike will be joining us as our special guest speaker then, and we shall be posting on our social media channels to let you know about that nearer the time. And in the meantime, I think we should all maybe say season's greetings to everybody. Should we say that?
Yeah, happy Christmas, everyone.
Happy Christmas, everybody. Ho, ho, ho.
Hope Santa brings you everything you wish for.
David Heiner did post an alarming picture of Peter Roper wearing an enormous white beard on Facebook a couple of days ago. So.
All right, and many of us are adopting our Santa hats now, going through our social media avatars. So that's all from us. Thank you for being a brilliant audience, and we will see you again in the new year. Thank you, Simon and Alan. You've both been brilliant.
Thank you. Bye.